Hotep, everybody. Hey, this is Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network, host of the African History Network show. It is Tuesday, March 21st, 2023, and we are live. I'm a talk show host, researcher, lecture writer, and historian. So I've talked about this topic before, and I'm going to talk about it on Faraji Muhammad show, The Culture, probably on Thursday of this week. And this deals with Black World War II veterans, African-American World War II veterans, and how they were discriminated against when it came to using the GI Bill. And the GI Bill changed the landscape in this country of who got to go to college. And it helped, it was one of the tools of the federal government that helped white people to create generational wealth. Okay. So you've heard me talk about this before on the African History Network show. And I posted an article a couple of days ago dealing with how House Democrats are trying to get a new bill passed that would restore the GI Bill. So we'll discuss Black World War II veterans were discriminated against using GI Bill benefits while white veterans built wealth. House Democrats pushed to restore GI Bill to help benefit African-American families and families of Black World War II vets. So share this broadcast on your social media platforms. Invite your friends to tune in. Okay, so the 1944 GI Bill's promise was denied to 1 million Black World War II veterans due to racism. The GI Bill Restoration Act to resolve GI Bill racial inequities, introduced by Representatives James Clyburn of South Carolina and Representative Seth Moulton, Democrat of Massachusetts, would help benefit the families of Black World War II veterans and highlight the story of World War II veteran Sergeant Isaac Woodard, who I've talked about here on the show before. And he was an African-American sergeant who served in World War II, and he was honorably discharged. And he was beaten by a white police officer in South Carolina, and he was blinded as a result of the beating. Okay. And this, he was blinded in 1946, and the attack on Sergeant Isaac Woodard helped to fuel the modern day civil rights movement. All right. Now, this is one of the policies that would help repair the damage of 246 years of slavery, decades of Jim Crow segregation, redlining, housing discrimination, racism, segregation when it comes to home ownership, getting jobs, college tuition, bank loans, etc. Okay. So this is what we're going to discuss today. And also, we're celebrating the 13th year anniversary of the African History Network show. First broadcasted March 10th, 2010. This is the 13th year. This month is the 13th year anniversary of the African History Network show. So we're celebrating that as well. And you can help to support the African History Network, help us keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting, pay some of the bills, etc. $ the AHN show through Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App. Also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show. And then also at our website, TheAHNShow.com. Okay, so let's look at this. Let's look at this history lesson, and we'll talk about the current bill that is being reintroduced as well. So if we look at this article here from history.com, the official website of the History Channel, FDR signs GI Bill. FDR signs GI Bill. Okay. So this takes place towards the end of World War II, and it's right after D-Day in Normandy, June 6, 1944. If we look at this here, June 22nd, 1944, FDR signs GI Bill. On June 22nd, 1944, U.S. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signs the GI Bill, which was an unprecedented act of legislation designed to compensate returning members of the armed forces, known as GIs. Okay, it stands for government issue, GIs, for their efforts in World War II. Now, as the last of the sweeping New Deal reforms, President Roosevelt's administration created the GI Bill, which was officially known as the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944. And his administration created this bill hoping to avoid a relapse into the Great Depression. And the Great Depression basically begins in 1929 when you had the stock market crash of October 1929, hoping to avoid a relapse into the Great Depression after World War II ends. President Roosevelt particularly wanted to prevent a repeat of what was known as the Bonus March of 1932, the Bonus March of 1932. And this was a march when you had 20,000 unemployed veterans and their families who went to Washington, D.C. to protest. Okay, this was known as the Bonus March of 1932. So he wanted to avoid something like that happening again, and the embarrassment of something like that happening as well while World War II was taking place. So the American Legion, which was a veterans organization, successfully fought for many of the provisions included in the GI Bill, which gave returning servicemen access to unemployment compensation, low interest home and business loans, and most importantly, funding for education. Unemployment compensation, low interest loans to buy homes and to start businesses, and also money to go to school, okay, college or trade schools. Now, by giving veterans money for tuition, living expenses, books, supplies, and equipment, the GI Bill effectively transformed higher education in America. And this changes, the GI Bill changes largely who gets to go to college, all right? And it helps create a lot of wealth and generational wealth for a lot of white families. Now, before World War II, okay, and the U.S. gets involved in World War II in 1941, December 1941, because of the attack on Pearl Harbor. Now, World War II actually begins September 1939 when Adolf Hitler invades Poland. Incidentally, Ukraine is bordered by Poland and Russia. So Russia invading Ukraine is in the region where World War II started. So before the war, college had been an option for only 10 to 15% of young Americans, and university campuses had become known as a haven for the most privileged classes, Okay. Now, by 1947, vets made up half of the nation's college enrollment. Okay. So you're looking at basically like 2 years after World War II ends. Okay. Veterans make up half of the nation's college enrollment. Now, 3 years later, nearly 500,000 Americans graduated from college compared to 160,000 in 1939. So here we see government policy working to help people, working to help veterans, working to help their families, largely white people. Okay. So you have a lot of Republicans who say they're against socialism, but the GI Bill was funded by taxpayer dollars and funded by the government. Okay. But this is a type of socialistic program because you have many people contributing to pay for this who can't take advantage of the benefits. And this totally changes who gets to go to college. All right. So 1950, nearly 500,000 Americans graduate from college compared to only 160,000 graduating in 1939, basically before World War II starts. Now, as educational institutions opened their doors to this diverse new group of students, overcrowded classrooms and residences prompted widespread improvement and expansion of university facilities and teaching staffs. An array of new vocational courses were developed across the country, including advanced training in education, agriculture, commerce, mining, and fishing skills that had previously been taught only informally. Now, the GI Bill became one of the major forces that drove economic expansion in America that lasted 30 years after World War II. And when we saw the HR 40 hearing in August of 2019, that's around the 400th year anniversary of August 20th, 1619, when those 20 and odd Africans came into Virginia on the White Lion pirate ship. When we saw the HR 40 hearing in the House of Representatives, a subcommittee in the House of Representatives, Dr. Julian Malveaux, who we've had here on the African History Network show before, Dr. Julian Malveaux talked about the GI Bill and how the GI Bill created untold, how the GI Bill changed who got to go to college and how it created wealth for thousands of white families. And how African Americans were drastically discriminated against when it came to being able to use those benefits that we earned and that our taxpayer dollars were paying for. All right, let's continue here. Okay, so only 20% of the money set aside for unemployment compensation under the bill was given out. Okay, only 20% of the money set aside for unemployment compensation for the bill was given out, as most veterans found jobs or pursued higher education. Low interest home loans enabled millions of American families to move out of urban centers and buy or build homes outside the city, changing the face of the suburbs. So you have the baby boomer generation that's basically, 1945, 1946, basically started in 1946. World War II ends. The GIs come back home. They're starting families. They need to buy houses. Okay. And then you have the suburbs being formed. They're going to be allowed to put down 3% down on low interest loans to get to buy houses in the newly formed suburbs. And then you're also going to have the expressway system that's going to be built. And that comes from the U.S. Interstate Highway Acts of 1952 and 1956. And they're going to drive 41,000 miles of interstate highways all across the country. And that's going to run through about 1,600 African-American communities, okay, and wipe out a lot of our homes, wipe out a lot of our businesses. We see that in the Fillmore district in San Francisco, okay, 883 businesses wiped out, about 20,000 people displaced, and that they were largely African-American. So there was an article that from InTheseTimes.com. Let me see if I can pull this up. InTheseTimes.com that dealt with Detroit's downfall. And it talked about the myth of Black misleadership. Detroit's downfall, the myth of Black misleadership. That's what the article was originally called. They changed the title of it to half a century after Detroit uprising, city still stranded by capitalism and federal government. I think that, yeah, this is by Marilyn Katz for InTheseTimes.com. And one of the things she talks about in this article and the original one called The Myth of Black Misleadership, and it dealt with the city of Detroit. It talked about how when Coleman Alexander Young became mayor of Detroit in January 1974, and African-American mayors started taking over these other inner cities. The cities were on life support that were given to us and had a declining tax base. They were suffering from white flight, things of this nature. But they were the victim of federal government policies, So the name of this article, August 8th, 2013, a half century after Detroit uprising. They're talking about the Detroit Rebellion, 1967. Cities still stranded by capitalism and federal government. How federal policy and Big Otto drove black blight and white flight. How federal policy and Big Otto, the auto industry, General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler, drove black blight and white flight. This is from August 8th, 2013 by Marilyn Katz for InTheseTimes.com. And one of the things it talks about here is after World War II ends, okay? And they talk about the Great Migration, fueled by a population explosion during the late 1930s and 1940s, when tanks and airplanes for America's war effort rolled off the assembly lines. Detroit's population grew from 1.5 million people in 1930 to 1.8 million in 1950. And during the same period, thousands more came for the relatively low-skilled but high-paying union-protected jobs at places like Ford, Chrysler, Packard, and GM. However, by August 1967, Detroit had already lost more than 300,000 residents, equal to the population loss each decade since then. Okay, so they go through, talk about the auto industry and pushing for some of these policies. And then they talk about this here. White workers, okay, in 1950, Detroit was a white-dominated city. By 1970, more whites lived in the suburbs than in the city of Detroit. While ignited by the movement of auto jobs to the suburbs, this mass white exodus was fueled by the federal government and its policies. This mass white exodus was fueled by the federal government and its policies. In 1949, Congress passed the Federal Housing Act. 1949, Congress passed the Federal Housing Act. For the first time, home ownership required only 3% down for an attractive low interest rate mortgage. The Federal Housing Act guidelines favored mortgages in the new suburban developments that were popping up to meet post-war demand and actively discouraged their use in older inner city neighborhoods. Armed with the new Federal Housing Act product and Veteran Affairs loans, white workers moved with the companies to the suburbs, trading in their houses in what became a racially mixed city in the inner city for a suburban tract home in then virtually all white suburbs. Rather than congregate with others on the way to work in a streetcar, they drove past sprawling suburbs on the new highways, lobbied for by Big Otto and built at taxpayer expense. The expressways, the U.S. Interstate Highway Acts in 1952 and 1956 were lobbied for by the auto industry, General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler especially, and built with taxpayer dollars, and then demolished African-American homes and businesses And then we're being discriminated against when it comes to buying these homes in the newly formed suburbs with government programs like the Federal Housing Act of 1949, but then also the GI Bill. Okay, so we're being discriminated against from using government programs to buy homes in the suburbs, and then the expressways paid for by taxpayer dollars are demolishing our businesses and homes in the inner city. Okay, let's continue. So let's go back to this article here from history.com. FDR signs the GI Bill. And these are some of the things that we talk about in the 12-week online class that I teach on Sundays. Black resistance movements from the Haitian Revolution, U.S. Civil War, Civil Rights Movement, and Black Power Movement, 1800 to 1968. Okay, so our next class is Sunday, March 26, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Visit our website, TheAHNShow.com, TheAHNShow.com, and you can register for that. That's a 12-week online class that I teach, and I teach the classes on we teach them on Saturdays and Sundays. Okay, Saturday it is 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Saturday it is Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa. Understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. And we deal with thousands of years of history and what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. And I'll just show you this. We have it right here on the homepage of our website, TheAfricanHistoryNetwork.com. So when you go to the website, it shows you the information about our radio show, Sundays, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the African History Network show. We have a PayPal, Cash App information there so you can support us. And then Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understand the Transatlantic Slave Trade. Next class is Saturday, March 25th. Click right here to register. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. You can go back and watch it anytime. And even after the course is over with, you have full access to the course. We have a bundle pack of classes, so you can register for both classes for only $120. It's a $300 value. And this is the class I teach on Sundays. Black resistance movements, Haitian Revolution, Civil War, Civil Rights Movement, Black Power Movement. Okay, so you can register for those. And we get deep into the history. These are 12-week online courses. I do a PowerPoint presentation. We have book references, articles, video clips. So most people have never seen history taught like this before. We have tons of documentation for it as well. And you can use this information with your children also. I would say the content is PG-13. So you can use the information with your children also. Okay. So that's at our website, TheAfricanHistoryNetwork.com. And as soon as you register, you can start watching the content. And then you can join us live in the class on Saturday and Sunday. Okay, let's continue here. All right, let's go back to, I want to go back to the article here dealing with the GI Bill. All right, let's see here. Okay, so low interest home loans enabled millions of American families to move out of urban centers and buy or build homes outside the city, changing the face of the suburbs. Now, over 50 years, the impact of the GI Bill was enormous, with 20 million veterans and dependents using the education benefits and 14 million homes guaranteed. Okay, 20 million veterans and their dependents, okay, their children, using the education benefits from the GI Bill, and 14 million home loans guaranteed because of the GI Bill, for a total federal investment of $67 billion. Among the millions of Americans who have taken advantage of the GI Bill are former presidents George H.W. Bush, the father, George H.W. Bush, Gerald Ford, former Vice President Al Gore, and entertainers Johnny Cash, Ed McMahon, Paul Newman, and Clint Eastwood. So check out this article from history.com, official website of the History Channel. This is This Day in History, June 22nd, 1944, FDR signs the GI Bill. Okay, now I want to go to, if you have questions about the class, email us at TheAHNShow at TheAfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We can help you. TheAHNShow at TheAfricanHistoryNetwork.com. All right, now, secondly, I want to go to this other article here. Now, this also ties into when we look at the discrimination when it comes to the GI Bill. This also ties into a history of redlining, okay? A history of redlining. And redlining was created by the federal government right around 1937. There's a good piece from blackpast.org that deals with this. Let's see, let's pull up this piece from blackpast.org. And this deals with understanding government policy. So when we talk about repairing the damage of a legacy of 246 years of slavery, decades of Jim Crow segregation, redlining, housing discrimination when it comes to getting bank loans, home loans, funding to go to college, etc., you have to change those laws and policies that were put in place that discriminated against us. Just cutting the check doesn't address that, okay? Because those laws and policies that maldistributed wealth, power, and resources and continue to inflict harm, those policies will still be in place if you don't correct them. You have to correct those laws and policies that maldistributed the wealth, power, and resources. One of them is dealing with the GI Bill. Just giving cash payments doesn't address that harm, because the laws and policies will still be in place. And after you spend the money's gone, and you're still being hurt by those policies. That's why we have to have comprehensive reparations, okay? Not just cash payments. Cash payments can be part of overall comprehensive repairing of the damage, or restitution, or correcting structural inequities, because we need to take the term reparations out of the discussion and just focus on the policies that we need to get, the policies that we want in place. Just focus on that, as opposed to talking about reparations, because then reparations gets attacked because then it's associated with slavery and things like this. What we really should do is push the policies that we need to be in place to repair the damage and correct the harm that was done, and then deal with a history of those laws and policies. And you can trace that back to slavery, as opposed to the focus being on slavery. The focus should be on present day structural inequities and how to correct that, because that is a legacy of slavery. Okay, redlining, 1937. This is from blackpast.org. Redlining refers to a discriminatory pattern of disinvestment and obstructive lending practices that act as an impediment to home ownership among African Americans and other people of color. Okay, banks use the concept to deny loans to homeowners. Banks use the concept to deny loans to homeowners and would-be homeowners who lived in these neighborhoods. This in turn resulted in neighborhood economic decline, and withholding and the withholding of services or their provision at an exceptionally high cost. The origin of the term redlining stems from the policies developed by the Homeowners Loan Corporation, which is a government program. The Homeowners Loan Corporation, created in 1933 by the President Franklin Delano Roosevelt administration to reduce home foreclosures during the Great Depression, and then institutionalized by the 1937 U.S. Housing Act, which established the Federal Housing Association, FHA, the Federal Housing Association. Now, federal housing agencies, including the Homeowners Loan Corporation and the Federal Housing Association, determined whether areas were deemed unfit for investments by banks, insurance companies, savings and loan associations, and other financial companies. The areas were physically demarcated with red shaping on a map. Okay, they drew red lines around areas in the inner city where African Americans lived. Okay, and green lines around out in the suburbs. In contrast, zones which were to receive preferential lending status were marked in green shading, and intermediate areas in blue shading. Often these decisions were arbitrarily based on the area's racial composition, rather than the income levels. While the practice was almost universal before 1968, the Civil Rights Act passed that year, which is the Fair Housing Act of 1968, which was as a result of the modern day civil rights movement. The Civil Rights Act passed that year theoretically outlawed redlining, okay, but it's going to take another 20 years before it's really enforced. Nonetheless, its impact was felt long after that date. In a series of Pulitzer Prize winning articles, which appeared in 1988 under the title The Color of Money, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution reporter Bill Dedman, D-E-D-M-E-N, described how Atlanta, Georgia banks still discriminated by the racial designation of neighborhoods, how Atlanta, Georgia banks still discriminated by racial designation of neighborhoods. His article illustrated how these banks were nearly twice as likely to lend to homeowners and prospective home buyers in low-income white neighborhoods as compared to affluent African-American areas, okay? Banks were nearly twice as likely to lend to homeowners and prospective buyers in low-income white neighborhoods as compared to affluent African-American areas. As a consequence of redlining, government program, originally, neighborhoods that local banks deemed unfit for investment were left undeveloped or in disrepair. Attempts to improve these neighborhoods with even relatively small business scale ventures were commonly obstructed by financial institutions that continued to label the underwriting as too risky or simply rejected them outright. When existing businesses collapsed, new ones were not allowed to replace them, often leaving entire blocks empty and crumbling. Consequently, African Americans in those neighborhoods were frequently limited in their access to banking, healthcare, retail merchandise, and even groceries. Now, these are examples of the harm that was done by a lot of government programs and how we are still dealing with the effects of that harm today. So when we talk about repairing the damage of these laws and policies and how it still shows up in structural inequities today, this is what we're talking about. So it was laws and policies that put us in this predicament. is going to be laws and policies to take us out of this predicament, as one of my teachers, Dr. Claude Anderson, correctly states. You have to understand the history of how all this was shaped. This is after slavery ends. And the GI Bill is one of the most significant pieces of government legislation that helped create those structural inequities. Okay, one notable exception to this, and still is the proliferation of liquor stores and bars, which seemingly transcended the area's stigma of financial risk. Redlining also led to an appreciable dearth or lack of employment opportunities in these neighborhoods, as prospective small-scale employers were disinclined to locate there. Crime often followed in the wake of these declining neighborhoods, making further investment less likely. These developments created a cycle which seemingly justified the initial redlining practices. Okay, so check this piece out here from blackpast.org called Redlining, 1937. Give some background history on redlining. Okay, and this came from the U.S. federal government. All right, now, then also we can look at this piece, this other piece here. This is from National Public Radio, NPR.org, A Forgotten History of How the U.S. Government Segregated America. A Forgotten History, hold on, let me pull this up. A Forgotten History of How the U.S. Government Segregated America. This is why understanding history, law, politics, and economics is so important. And politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. Okay. Politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. You know, politics influences every aspect of our life. In 1933, faced with a housing shortage, the U.S. federal government began a program explicitly designed to increase and segregate America's housing stock. Author Richard Rothstein says the housing programs begun under the New Deal so the New Deal is roughly right around 33, 34 through 1944, 1945. The GI Bill was the last bill in the New Deal. Okay. Author Richard Rothstein says the housing programs begun under the New Deal were tantamount to a, quote, state-sponsored system of segregation, end quote, a state-sponsored system of segregation. The government's efforts were primarily designed to provide housing to white middle class, lower middle class families, he says. African Americans and other people of color were left out of the new suburban communities and pushed instead into urban housing projects. Rothstein's new book, The Color of Law, examines the local local, state, and federal housing policies, that mandated segregation. He notes that the Federal Housing Administration, which was established in 1934, furthered the segregation efforts by refusing to insure mortgages in and near African-American neighborhoods, a policy known as redlining. At the same time, the Federal Housing Administration, FHA, was subsidizing builders who were mass producing entire subdivisions for white people, with the requirement that none of the homes be sold to African Americans. Okay, so you have restrictive covenants, and restrictive covenants were in clauses written into the deeds that these homes could only be sold to white people. They could not be sold to African Americans. These were restrictive covenants. Now they're going to be made illegal. Restrictive covenants are going to be made illegal by the Fair Housing Act of 1968. But you still have homes today that have those clauses in their deeds. Okay, so read the rest of this article here. A forgotten history of how the U.S. government segregated America. So this is all dealing with laws and policies. Okay, so this is why you have to understand history, politics, law, and economics when we talk about repairing the damage from these laws and policies. All right. How's everybody doing? Give us a thumbs up, give us a heart, give us a like on this broadcast. If you like this type of information, also, you can support the African History Network. $ the AHN show through Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App, also through PayPal, paypal.me / the AHN show. So we definitely need your help as well. And we are celebrating the 13th year anniversary of me broadcasting the African History Network show. So I first started March 10th, 2010. So this is our 13th year anniversary month. And we definitely appreciate your support in the past. Definitely need it today as well. This helps us keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting, pay some of the bills, etc. And register for the online history classes that I teach on Saturdays and Sundays also. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school, and Black resistance movements from the Haitian Revolution, U.S. Civil War, Civil Rights Movement, and Black Power movement. Visit our website, TheAfricanHistoryNetwork.com, for more information and to register for those courses. As soon as you register, you can start watching archive content. You can join us live in the class on Saturdays and Sundays, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Okay, let's continue. So there was a really good article, another one from history.com, official website of the History Channel. Now, this deals with how the GI Bill's promise was denied to a million Black World War II veterans. And we know they're going to be 1.2 million Black World War II veterans, African-American World War II veterans. Let's look at this article here. Okay. How the GI Bill's promise was denied to GI Bill's promise was denied to a million Black World War II veterans. The sweeping bill promised prosperity to veterans. So why didn't Black Americans benefit? The sweeping bill promised prosperity to veterans. So why didn't Black Americans benefit? This is from April 20th, 2021, originally from June 21st, 2019. Okay, so they talk about an African-American veteran named Eugene Burnett. And he and his wife wanted to buy a home in Levittown in New York. And Levittown is known for racial discrimination, not letting African Americans live there historically. And it was in 1949, he and his wife wanted to buy one of the new homes being built in Levittown. And he was ready to settle down in a larger home with his family. The newly established Long Island suburb seemed like the perfect place to begin their post-World War II life, one that he hoped would be improved with the help of the GI Bill. Okay, the Servicemen's Readjustment Act, signed into law June 22nd, 1944 by President Roosevelt. And the GI Bill was a piece of sweeping legislation aimed at helping World War II veterans like Eugene Burnett prosper after World War II. But when he spoke with a salesman about buying the house using a GI Bill guaranteed mortgage, the door to suburban life in Levittown slammed firmly in his face. The suburb was not open to African-American residents. Eugene Burnett's wife, Bernice, recalled this incident and said, quote, "It was as though it wasn't real. Look at this house. Can you imagine having this? And then for them to tell me because of the color of my skin that I can't be part of it." Now, the Burnett's were not the only African Americans for whom the promise of the GI Bill turned out to be an illusion. Though the bill helped white Americans prosper and accumulate wealth, in the post-war years, it did not deliver on that promise for veterans of color, especially African Americans. In fact, the wide disparity in the GI Bill's implementation ended up helping drive growing gaps in wealth, education, and civil rights between white and African Americans. Now, while the GI Bill's language did not specifically exclude African American veterans from its benefits, it was structured in a way that ultimately shut doors for 1.2 million African American veterans who had bravely served their country during World War II in segregated ranks, bravely served their country during World War II in segregated ranks. So there was a fear of Black advancement from this government policy by some Southern segregationists, okay? And this changes how the benefits in the GI Bill are going to be distributed. Okay, let's look at this here. And give us a thumbs up, give us a heart, give us a like on this broadcast. How's everybody doing? Follow us here on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, and our YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP. Turn on live notifications so you know when we go live. Subscribe to our channels, please, also. All right, let's continue. How you all like this type of information? Okay, now when lawmakers began drafting the GI Bill in 1944, some Southern Democrats feared that returning Black veterans would use public sympathy for veterans to advocate against Jim Crow laws. Use public sympathy for veterans to advocate against Jim Crow laws to make sure that the GI Bill largely benefited white people. The Southern segregationist Democrats drew on tactics they had previously used to ensure that the New Deal helped as few African Americans as possible. Now, also, this is before the party realignment completes in about 1968 as well. After 64, when Barry Goldwater, senator from Arizona, runs against Lyndon Johnson for president, and Barry Goldwater loses. Then in 1968, when Richard Nixon, who ran for president in 1960 against John F. Kennedy, when Richard Nixon runs for president in 68, and he runs on the platform of law and order. And this is a backlash to the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, the rebellions that are taking place across this country. He runs on that platform. There's a backlash to advancement of African Americans. By 1960, 2/3 of African Americans had switched from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party. And this goes back to 1928 and what's known as the Lily White Movement of 1928, which was an effort by Republicans to push African Americans out of the Republican Party and appeal to Southern segregationist Democrats in 5 former Confederate states to get them to vote for Herbert Hoover in the 1928 presidential election against Al Smith, who was a moderate Democrat from New York. This was known as a Southern strategy, okay? This was known as a Southern strategy. And it worked. Herbert Hoover became president. And the Republicans were, who had been the party of Lincoln, okay, Republicans who have been the party of Lincoln. And we know that the Republican Party is going to be founded in 1854 by groups of abolitionists and, you know, some members of the Whig Party, because the Whig Party, WHIG, was dying out by 1954. And this was a direct backlash. The forming of the Republican Party was a direct backlash to what's known as the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, where you had the Kansas-Nebraska Act left up to those people living in Kansas and Nebraska, the new states of Kansas and Nebraska, left up to them to determine whether or not they had slavery, as opposed to it being dictated to them by the federal government. So it was a congressional law that allowed for the westward expansion of slavery, which infuriated a lot of abolitionists. And this caused a backlash, and the Republican Party is going to be formed by groups of abolitionists to push for the abolition of slavery and be a counter to the Democratic Party at the time, which was heavy in the South. This piece here from house.gov, history.house.gov, and house.gov is the official website of the U.S. House of Representatives. This piece right here on party realignment, this deals with the realignment of the political parties, not just the Democratic Party, but also the Republican Party. And that goes back to the Lily White movement in 1928. And it deals with the rise of the Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s and how Republicans were increasingly ignoring the concerns of African Americans and trying to push us out of the Republican Party. And then over time, we started going over to the Democratic Party because we saw them as being more receptive to our needs. And generally speaking, they were more receptive to our needs, even though we were leery of them. And over time, more of us started going over to the Democratic Party. And this talks about the Lily White movement in 1928 and the effort of the Republicans to get Herbert Hoover elected as president. Okay, so that's what that's where that goes to. It wasn't because of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1968 or the Voting Rights Act of 1965. That's not why African Americans switched from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party. You got to go back like 40 years before that to the Lily White movement of 1928. Okay, I've done a whole lecture dealing with this history and the party realignment, things of this nature. Okay, so check this out here at history.house.gov. It's called Party Realignment. Party Realignment. All right, let's continue. Let's go back to this piece here from the GI Bill. Okay, so to make sure that the GI Bill largely benefited white people, the Southern segregationist Democrats drew on tactics they had previously used to ensure that the New Deal helped as few black people as possible, During the drafting of the law, the chair of the House Veterans Committee, Mississippi Congressman John Rankin, who was a virulent racist, Mississippi Congressman John Rankin, he was a Southern segregationist Democrat and a virulent racist. Okay, and you had the Northern Democrats who were, generally speaking, more moderate. Then you had the Southern segregationist Democrats, also known as Dixiecrats. Okay, many of them. And then 1947. So, for instance, 1947, 48 presidential election. the Democratic Party, generally speaking, they ran on a more pro-civil rights agenda. You had Strom Thurmond, who was a Southern segregationist Democrat, who ran as a Dixiecrat for president also. Okay, he lost, thank God. He lost. But because of this, and then you deal with President Harry Truman, and President Harry Truman desegregating the armed forces in 1946. Okay, we'll talk about that because that came after Sergeant Isaac Woodard was beaten by a police officer. World War II veteran Sergeant Isaac Woodard was beaten by a police officer, and he was blinded in the attack by a police officer, a white police officer. So during the drafting of the GI Bill, the chair of the House Veterans Committee, Mississippi Congressman John Rankin, played hardball and insisted that the program be administered by individual states instead of the federal government. Okay, he insisted that the program be administered by individual states instead of the federal government. Mississippi Congressman John Rankin got his way. Rankin was known for his virulent racism. He defended segregation, opposed interracial marriage, and had even proposed legislation to confine, then deport every person with Japanese heritage during World War II. Okay, so we know that took place about 1942, 1945, 46 or so. Right in that period of time during World War II. Yeah. So, well, they said 1941, December 7, 1941 to June 30 of 1946. All right. Now, when the bill came to a committee veto, John Rankin stonewalled the bill in an attempt to gut another provision that entitled all veterans to $20 a week on unemployment compensation for a year. White supremacist John Rankin knew this would represent a significant gain for African-American Southerners, so he refused to cast a critical proxy vote in protest. The American Legion ended up tracking down the congressman who had left his proxy vote with John Rankin and flying him to Washington to break the deadlock. President Roosevelt signed the Servicemen's Readjustment Act into law on June 22nd, 1944, only weeks after the D-Day offensive began. It ushered into law sweeping benefits for veterans, including college tuition, low-cost home loans, and unemployment insurance. Now, when we look at the GI Bill's effect on African-American veterans, so from the start, African-American veterans had trouble securing GI Bill benefits. Some could not access benefits because they had not been given an honorable discharge, and a much larger number of African-American veterans were discharged dishonorably than their white counterparts. And a lot of this has to do with racism in the, racism in the military, especially in the Army, in the mistreatment of African-American soldiers. All right, let's continue. And a much larger number of Black veterans were discharged dishonorably than white counterparts. Now, veterans who would qualify could not find facilities that delivered on the bill's promise. Like for education facilities. Black veterans in vocational training program at a segregated high school in Indianapolis were unable to participate in activities related to plumbing, electricity, and printing because adequate equipment was only available to white students. Okay, Black veterans in a vocational training program at a segregated high school in Indianapolis were unable to participate in activities related to plumbing, electricity, and printing because adequate equipment was only available to white students. So this gets into getting beyond just the bill, but the capacity of institutions to be able to fulfill what the bill offers, to have the equipment, to have the capacity, to have the number of classrooms, to have the number of professors or teachers, to be able to handle the influx of students coming in. It's one thing to have a bill that says we're going to allow this amount of funding to go to school, things like that. That's good. But the institutions also have to have the capacity to be able to handle the influx of students that are coming because of the bill. That requires more funding. Simple intimidation kept others from enjoying GI Bill benefits. In 1947, for example, a crowd hurled rocks at African-American veterans as they moved into a Chicago housing development, okay? A crowd hurled rocks at Black veterans as they moved into a Chicago housing development. Thousands of Black veterans were attacked in the years following World War II, and some were singled out and lynched. Though John Rankin, Mississippi Congressman, racist John Rankin, though he had lost the battle to exclude African-American men from Veteran Affairs employment insurance, which is what he wanted to do, it was doled out inequitably, however. Men who applied for unemployment benefits were kicked out of the program if any other work was available to them, even work that provided less than subsistence wages. Southern postmasters were even accused of refusing to deliver the forms that African-American veterans needed to fill out to receive their unemployment benefits. African-American veterans and civil rights groups protested their treatment, calling for Just a second, close this out. Black veterans and civil rights groups protested their treatment, calling for protections like Black involvement in the Veteran Affairs and non-discriminatory loans, but the racial disparities in the implementation of the GI Bill had already been set into motion. The racial disparities in the implementation of the GI Bill had already been set into motion. As the years went on, white veterans flowed into newly created suburbs, as I talked about, where they began amassing wealth in skilled positions. But African-American veterans lacked those options. The majority of skilled jobs were given to white workers. The majority of skilled jobs were given to white workers. Now, here's a picture here of Staff Sergeant Herbert Ellison explaining the GI Bill of Rights to African-American members of the Quartermaster Trucking Company. Okay, so this is probably 1944, 1945. Now, a white post-war housing boom and redlining in black neighborhoods. Okay, so this gets into what I was talking about dealing with redlining. The post-war housing boom almost entirely excluded African Americans, most of whom remained in cities that received less and less investment from businesses and banks. Though the GI Bill guaranteed low-interest mortgages and other loans, they were not administered by the VA itself. Thus, the Veteran Affairs Office could co-sign, but not actually guarantee the loans. This gave white-run financial institutions free rein to refuse mortgages and loans to African Americans. So when we look at redlining, once again, redlining was a decades-old practice marking maps by race to characterize the risk of lending money and providing insurance. It made purchasing a home even more difficult for African American veterans. Lenders froze out poor neighborhoods, ensuring that loan assistance and insurance would be denied. Okay, lenders froze out poor neighborhoods, ensuring that loan assistance and insurance would be denied. And new white suburbs often came with overly racist covenants that denied entry to black people. So these are the restrictive covenants, where it's stated in the deed that the home could only be sold to someone white, or it could not be sold to African Americans, cannot be sold to Negroes or non-white people, etc. So to give you an example, in 1947, only 2 of the more than 3,200 Veteran Affairs guaranteed home loans in 13 Mississippi cities went to black borrowers. Not 2%, but 2. Okay, in 1947. Now, see, this is a legacy of slavery. This is why it's important to focus on the laws and policies that brought about these structural inequities that brought us to today. And then you can trace that history back to slavery, but focus on correcting present day structural inequities, especially in this climate where you're dealing with anti-critical race theory laws being passed. You're dealing with the attack on the teaching of African American history, and the fact that the majority of the people that have to vote on these bills, especially at the federal level, are white. And in the Senate, you need 60 votes in the Senate. So even with 51 Democrats, you still need 9 Republicans to vote for any of these bills, unless they qualify for the budget reconciliation process, which requires then a simple majority, which is just 51. But most of these bills, you need 60 votes for, including the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. You need 60 votes for that. And then you're dealing with the coup plotter Republicans controlling the House of Representatives. Okay. And you only have 212 Democrats in the House, basically 212. So you need 6 Republicans to vote for any bill to get it passed in the House. If all the Democrats vote for a bill, you're going to need 6 Republicans to vote for it. And you're going to need, Speaker of the House of Representatives, punk ass Kevin McCarthy, to bring it to the House floor for a debate and a vote, because he's a Speaker of the House, so he controls which bills come to the floor for a debate and a vote, and the bill would have to be voted out of committee in the first place, and Republicans control all the committees in the House of Representatives. Okay, because they have more seats in the House because of the 2022 midterm elections. All right, now, in 1947, Okay, so basically 2 years after World War II ends, only 2 of the more than 3,200 Veteran Affairs guaranteed home loans in 13 Mississippi cities went to African American borrowers. Only 2 out of 3,200. Quote, these impediments were not confined to the South, end quote, notes historian Ira Katznelson. He said, quote, in New York and the northern New Jersey suburbs, fewer than 100 of the 67,000 mortgages insured by the GI Bill supported home purchases by non-white people. Fewer than 100 out of 67,000. So there was a failure to receive GI Bill education benefits also, not just getting loans to buy homes or loans to start businesses, but also education benefits. Now, African American veterans, in search of the education they have been guaranteed, fared no better. Many black men returned home from the war, didn't even try to take advantage of the bill's education benefits. They could not afford to spend time in school instead of working. But those who did were at a considerable disadvantage compared to their white counterparts. Those who did were at a considerable disadvantage compared to their white counterparts. Public education provided poor preparation for African American students, and many of them lacked much educational attainment at all due to poverty and social pressures. As veteran applications flooded universities, African American students often found themselves left out. Northern universities dragged their feet when it came to admitting black students, and Southern colleges barred African American students entirely. And the Veteran Affairs Office itself encouraged African American veterans to apply for vocational training instead of university admission, and arbitrarily denied educational benefits to some students. Now, this is a picture here, veterans lining up for a last day rush to get counseling on GI Bill educational courses at the New York Regional Office Veterans Administration on July 25th, 1951. Now, those students who did try to attend college found doors closed at every turn. A full 95% of black veterans were shunted off to black colleges, institutions that were underfunded and overwhelmed by the influx of new students. Most were unaccredited, and with a mass influx in applicants, they had to turn away tens of thousands of veterans because they didn't have the capacity. This goes to capacity building. A lot of the HBCUs back at this time did not have the capacity to handle the huge influx of the increase of African American students coming in and who were being discriminated against because they couldn't go to a lot of white institutions in the South. Okay, the ones who were fortunate enough to be able to get some type of funding to go to school, the HBCUs didn't have the capacity to handle those numbers. Quote, though Congress granted all soldiers the same benefits theoretically, writes historian Hillary Herbold, Herbold, quote, the segregationist principles of almost every institution of higher learning effectively disbarred a huge proportion of Black veterans from earning a college degree. Now, the GI Bill of 1944 is one of the main pieces of legislation after slavery that's cited as largely contributing to the racial wealth gap. Now, the original GI Bill ended in July 1956. By that time, nearly 8 million World War II veterans had received education or training, and 4.3 million home loans were handed out worth $33 billion. Okay, nearly by 1956, nearly 8 million World War II veterans had received education or training, and 4.3 million home loans went out to World War II veterans worth $33 billion, okay, had been handed out. But most African-American veterans have been left behind. As employment, college attendance, and wealth surged for whites, disparities with their African-American counterparts not only continued, but widened. Disparities with their African-American counterparts not only continued, but widened. There was historian Ira Katz-Nelson says there was no greater instrument for widening an already huge racial gap in post-war America than the GI Bill. Now, today, a stark wealth gap between African-American and white Americans persists. The median income for white households in 2019, this is median income, not net worth. Median income for white households in 2019, $76,057, according to the U.S. Census, and for African-American households, $46,073. Okay. Now, when you look at net worth, median household net worth, is like for 2019, it was like 17,000 for African-American households and about 170,000 for white households. That's median net worth, not average net worth. Median is a statistical measure where 50% of the population is below that point and 50% is above that point. Check out this article here from history.com, official website of the History Channel, how the GI Bill's promise was denied to 1 million Black World War II veterans. Okay, that's at history.com. Okay, so when we look at, and you have a bill that's being reintroduced by Representative James Clyburn and Representative Seth Moulton to address this issue, okay, and help the families or family members of World War II veterans, okay, and try to help repair some of this damage. There's an article from thegrio.com, and I mentioned it briefly on the African History Network show this past Sunday. We'll probably talk about it on Faraji Muhammad's show, The Culture, this week, probably on Thursday. I should be on Thursday. They had technical difficulties. Was going to be today, but he was having technical difficulties, so I wasn't on the show today. They didn't broadcast at all today. Let's look at this here. How's everybody doing? How you all like this type of information? We have Vanessa, we have Tony watching, LaShonda. Give us a thumbs up, give us a heart, give us a like on this broadcast. Also, we're celebrating the 13th year anniversary of the African History Network show, of me broadcasting the African History Network show. First started March 10th, 2010. And you can support us in our work as well as we continue to educate, empower, and inspire people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's correct wrong behavior. You can support us at $ TheAHNShow through Cash App and through PayPal, paypal.me/TheAHNShow, or visit our website, TheAfricanHistoryNetwork.com, TheAfricanHistoryNetwork.com, because we have the information on the homepage of our website. We have the links there. All right, yes, because we have the information around the homepage of our website. Okay, let's continue here. All right, now, if we look at this piece here from thegrio.com, House Democrats reintroduce GI Bill to help Black veterans and descendants receive overdue benefits. This is from March 3rd, 2023 by my girl Ashley Banks. Because Ashley, I follow Ashley on was it Instagram, and connected with Ashley through Roland Martin show, because I'm on Roland Martin show on Friday, so that's how I connected with Ashley Banks a couple years ago. All right, now let's look at this here. So the GI Bill Restoration Act is probably the only shot we have of some kind of race-specific reparations in this country, said Richard Brookshire, co-founder and CEO of the Black Veterans Project. Okay, co-founder and CEO of the Black Veterans Project. And they have an interview with Richard here. There's a clip of him. So they have the interview here in this article, so you can check that out as well. Black World War II veterans and their descendants have yet to receive the overdue GI Bill benefits. However, some House Democrats hope to change that. On February 28th, House Representative members James Clyburn, Democrat of South Carolina, and Seth Moulton, Democrat of Massachusetts, reintroduced the Sergeant Isaac Woodard Jr. and Sergeant Joseph H. Maddox's GI Bill Restoration Act in an effort to seek justice for veterans and their descendants who are owed numerous benefits. Veterans and their descendants who are owed numerous benefits. Okay, now here's a picture of the Harlem Hellfighters during World War I. The 369th Infantry Regiment, also known as the Harlem Hellfighters. Now, Richard Brookshire, co-founder and CEO of the Black Veterans Project, told thegrio.com that the GI Bill might have to overcome some challenges before being signed into law. He said, I honestly feel like the GI Bill Restoration Act is fantastic, but I also know the political feasibility of that is very slim. I also know the political feasibility of that is very slim. In most respects, because of the cost, and then because there seems to be some level of disagreement about whether or not passing a piece of targeted racial policy like that would withstand judicial review. End quote. Yeah, because race-based policies at the federal level are illegal based upon Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, Section 601, which is non-discrimination of federally assisted programs. Okay, so this is why they would, they have to be careful. This is why they made a change in this reiteration of the GI Restoration Act. I'll come to that in just a minute. You can read the Civil Rights Act of 1964 at archives.gov. See, archives.gov, which is U.S. National Archives, as well as loc.gov. Let me see, where is that? Okay, that's Civil Rights Act of 1964. And okay, well, I'll have to pull that up here. The second word, U.S. Department of Labor. Yeah, U.S. National Archives. This should be it right here. Okay, U.S. National Archives. This is archives.gov. Civil Rights Act 1964. Okay. U.S. National Archives, and we want to go to Title VI. Non-discrimination and federally assisted programs. Section 601. No person in the United States shall, on the ground of race, color, or national origin, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. Okay, so this is why race-based policies at the federal level are illegal. And that was put into the 1964 Civil Rights Act because we were being discriminated against when it came to, a lot of federal policies. That's Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, non-discrimination and federally assisted programs. That's Section 601. So you can check that out at archives.gov. Okay, let's continue here. All right, so they talk about President Roosevelt signing the GI Bill in 1944, and the GI Bill was signed into law to assist veterans and their family members, qualifying veterans and their family members with paying for higher education, training programs, and other benefits, according to the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs website. Yet many African-American veterans did not receive any benefits after putting their life on the line for the United States. Quote, these Black veterans who served their country, who died, whose families are still trying to recoup, and they can't even get the benefits from what they deserved only because they were Black. It's a shame and disgrace, said Lee. Representative Barbara Lee. She recently spoke to thegrill.com and called it a disgrace, how the African American veterans were treated. She said the Black veterans who served their country, who died, whose families are still trying to recoup, they can't even get the benefits from what they deserved only because they were Black. It's a shame and a disgrace. She's also running for a U.S. Senate in California in the 2024 election. Now, this latest measure was named after Sergeant Isaac Woodard and Sergeant Maddox to honor the two black sergeants who faced discrimination in the U.S. after serving in World War II. On February 12, 1946, just hours after being honorably discharged from the United States Army, a South Carolina police officer violently assaulted 26-year-old Isaac Woodard and left him permanently blind. President Harry Truman was so horrified by the ordeal that on June 26, 1948, he issued an executive order to desegregate the armed forces, Time magazine reported. Okay, so this deals with, I want to go to this other article here from the Washington Post. And this deals with the beating of Sergeant Isaac Woodard in 1946. February 12, 1946, this right here. A black World War II veteran was beaten and blinded, fueling the civil rights movement. A new documentary explores how Isaac Woodard changed America. Now, this is from March 31st, 2021, okay, by Deneen L. Brown for the Washington Post. She writes some really good articles for the Washington Post. Okay, now here's Sergeant Isaac Woodard after he was beaten. Okay, World War II veteran Isaac Woodard after he was blinded in an assault by police. This picture's from the Library of Congress. In February of 1946, Sergeant Isaac Woodard, a decorated black soldier just returning from World War II, rode a Greyhound bus heading home to South Carolina. Sergeant Isaac Woodard had just been honorably discharged from the Army and was still wearing his uniform, and he asked the bus driver to stop so that he could use the restroom. The driver reluctantly pulled over, calling Sergeant Isaac Woodard boy. Woodard, who had just returned from more than 3 years of military service in the Pacific, stood up for himself and other African-American veterans, telling the driver not to talk to him like that. He said, "I'm a man just like you." At the next town, which was Batesburg, South Carolina, the white driver of the Greyhound bus called the police. The Batesburg police chief pulled Sergeant Isaac Woodard off the bus and immediately began beating him, plunging a blackjack into each of Sergeant Isaac Woodard's eye sockets and blinding him. This is the white police chief there in Batesburg, South Carolina. Okay, now Sergeant Isaac Woodard was taken to jail, where he would later explain that someone poured whiskey on him to say that he had been drunk. He spent the night in excruciating pain. The next morning, he was taken to court and ordered to sign papers that he could not see or read. A new documentary, which came out in 2021, right around March, April 2021, a new documentary called The Blinding of Isaac Woodard, directed by Jamila Ephron, Ephron, and narrated by Andre Holland, premiered Tuesday on American Experience on PBS. The documentary explores the story of Isaac Woodard's life and how the beating fueled the civil rights movement and changed the trajectory of U.S. history. Okay, now let's see. If we continue here, I'm going to skip over some of this. The documentary uncovers how a single individual can be the spark that ignites a movement and creates a seismic shift in public opinion, said Camille George, the film's executive producer. Although his name is little known today, Sergeant Isaac Woodard's story change hearts and minds and the law of the land, because this is going to lead to the desegregation of armed forces. Okay, now 2 months after Sergeant Isaac Woodard was blinded, he traveled to New York City, where he met with Walter White, executive secretary of the NAACP. The NAACP's legal team, led by Thurgood Marshall, had been looking for civil rights cases that could dramatize the impact of Jim Crow laws, lynchings, white supremacy, police brutality, and racial violence committed against people, against African Americans, racial violence committed against Black people. And here's a picture of Thurgood Marshall. This is from 1958 outside the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, hundreds of African American veterans have been attacked, and an unknown number were lynched. The NAACP offices were filled with harrowing reports of African American veterans lynched. One Black veteran had been murdered for casting a vote in a primary. In July of 1946, 4 Black people, including George W. Dorsey, a distinguished veteran who had served in World War II in the Pacific and North Africa, were beaten, tortured, fatally shot, and hanged from Moore's Ford Bridge in Walton County, Georgia, in what is called the last mass lynching in America. What is called the last lynching in America. This is July 1946, okay, in Walton County, Georgia. They were hung from the Moore's Ford Bridge. Jamila Efron, the film's director, okay, of the blinding of Isaac Woodard, she says so many people did not survive their encounters with police officers. Here, someone had survived. Isaac Woodard's face bore the evidence of the crime committed against him, end quote, she said. Now, unlike so many other African-American veterans who have been lynched, Isaac Woodard lived to tell his story. The NAACP was able to use Isaac Woodard to galvanize people, Jamila Efron said. Isaac Woodard traveled the country on a speaking tour. A benefit concert headlined by Billie Holiday, Woody Guthrie, and Duke Ellington was organized to raise money for Isaac Woodard. Heavyweight champion Joe Louis co-chaired the concert. Now, Sergeant Isaac Woodard took the stage speaking in a low voice. The audience of more than 20,000 people fell silent. He said, I spent 3.5 years in service. I spent 3.5 years in service of my country and thought I would be treated as a man when I returned to my country. But that was a mistake, he said. Now, Sergeant Isaac Woodard's story resonated. More than 900,000 African-American men fought in World War II. It's about 1.2 million fought in World War II. Most of them returned home to the South carrying themselves with dignity of having fought for their country, hoping they would be treated with respect. Instead, many were attacked simply for wearing their uniforms. Now, Jamila Efron said, quote, it coalesced with a moment when yet again Black men had gone off to fight for human rights to come home and have those rights denied to them. It reached a tipping point amongst Black veterans and Black communities that enough was enough. Now, the NAACP asked actor Orson Welles to use his weekly radio show to highlight the brutal attack on Isaac Woodard. Week after week, Orson Welles pounded at the question, who was the officer who beat and blinded Woodard? Orson Welles asked for help in identifying the town where Isaac Woodard was beaten and the name of the officer. Quote unquote, Officer X, Orson Welles announced, I'm talking to you. You are going to be uncovered. Now, within days, the NAACP received a letter from an African-American soldier who wrote that he was on the bus when Sergeant Isaac Woodard was pulled off. The letter writer identified the town where the beating occurred as Batesburg, South Carolina. Orson Welles announced, Officer X, we know your name now. Officer X, we know your name now. Now, here's Isaac Woodard applying for maximum disability benefits, and his mother stands to his right. So on September 19th, 1946, Walter White of the NAACP led a delegation of civil rights leaders to meet with President Harry Truman to urge him to work to pass anti-lynching legislation. Okay, we know federal anti-lynching legislation did not pass until 2022, and it was signed into law by President Joe Biden. That was the Emmett Till anti-lynching bill. When Walter White realizes Harry Truman isn't going to move forward, according to the PBS documentary, he tells the president, also a veteran, who he tells the president, and Truman was also a veteran, the story of Isaac Woodard, and Harry Truman was enraged. Quote, he had taken this meeting with civil rights leaders reluctantly and was prepared to brush them off, Jamila Efron said. When Harry Truman heard about the police attack on Woodard, President Harry Truman said, quote, my God, I didn't know it was this bad. We've got to do something, Jamila Efron said. Now, the next day, President Harry Truman ordered his attorney general to bring federal charges against Batesburg police officer Chief Linwood L. Shull, S-H-U-L-L. Okay, Linwood L. Shull, who was charged with violating the civil rights of Sergeant Isaac Woodard by blinding both of his eyes. Now, a month later, on November 5th, 1946, Police Chief Linwood L. Shull, his trial began in Columbia, South Carolina. The trial was presided over by Judge Waities, W-A-T-I-E-S, Waring, the son of a Confederate soldier. Okay, Judge J. Waities Waring, W-A-R-I-N-G. He was the son of a Confederate soldier. During the trial, and now South Carolina is where the Civil War started also, by the way, April 12, 1861. Now, during the trial, Isaac Woodard testified that he was pulled off of the interstate bus on the night of February 13th, 1946 in Batesburg, South Carolina. Shull was waiting for him at this bus door, he said, and struck him before he could say anything, according to a 1946 United Press news article. Quote, two war veterans, a Negro and a white, who were discharged at Augusta the same day as Isaac Woodard and rode on the bus with him, testified that the Negro was not drunk and had not created a disturbance. The all-white jury deliberated only 15 minutes before acquitting Police Chief Linwood L. Shaw. Okay, can you believe that? This is South Carolina. This is, racist South Carolina in 1946. They deliberated for 15 minutes before acquitting the white police chief. Quote, Judge Waring and his wife are appalled at the blatant miscarriage of justice. According to PBS, Waring would devote the rest of his career to the fight against racism. The Warings become the targets of threats and violence. Now, on December 5th, 1946, a month after the trial ended, President Harry Truman signed an executive order creating the President's Committee on Civil Rights. On June 28, 1947, President Harry Truman accepted the invitation from the NAACP's Walter White to speak at the organization's annual convention. Okay. He said there's no justifiable reason for discrimination because of ancestry or religion or race or color. He said we cannot any longer await the growth of a will to action in the slowest state of the most backward community. Our national government must show the way, end quote. Now, a month later, on July 26, 1946, President Harry Truman signed executive orders 9980 and 9981, racially integrating the U.S. military and the federal government workforce. Racially integrating the U.S. military and the federal government workforce. And this is going to, especially the federal government workforce, this is going to allow more African Americans to get employed in the federal government and create more upward mobility, especially in subsequent years, like after going to the 50s and then the 60s and the modern day civil rights movement, etc. So that was as a result of Sergeant Isaac Woodard's beating and blinding. And it was President Harry S. Truman who signed those executive orders. Okay, now, if we look here if we go back to the article here from thegrio.com, I want to give you some background history on Sergeant Isaac Woodard, because this bill that's being proposed is partly named after him. Now, according to a press release from Representative James Clyburn's office, Sergeant Maddox was medically discharged from the Army after sustaining an injury. Upon his return to the U.S., he was accepted into Harvard University. However, he was denied tuition assistance. Okay, that's Sergeant Joseph H. Maddox. However, he was denied tuition assistance. The NAACP and Veteran Affairs office advocated on Sergeant Joseph Maddox's behalf to ensure justice was served. Representative James Clyburn's office further highlighted the racial disparities that occurred after President Roosevelt signed the GI Bill into law. He talked about in 1947, only 2 of more than 3,200 home loans administered by the Veteran Affairs Office in Mississippi cities, it was 13 Mississippi cities, went to African-American borrowers. Roughly, Representative Clyburn said roughly 19% of white World War II veterans earned a college degree compared to just 6% of black veterans, end quote. And then he said, black veterans sacrificed for this country because they believed in the promise of justice and equity for all. Yet while the original GI Bill led to decades of prosperity for post-World War II America, this prosperity was not extended to the black service members, end quote. Now, Richard Brookshire told TheGrio.com that other discriminatory practices, such as redlining, also contributed to to widening the racial wealth gap between African Americans and white veterans. Okay, let's see. Let's go to. And now for the GI Bill Restoration Act to move forward, it must be passed in the House of Representatives, and then it has to be passed in the Senate before it can be signed into law. Brookshire told thegrio.com, the GI Bill is probably the only way, the only shot, the GI Bill Restoration Act is probably the only shot we have of some kind of race-specific reparations in this country, and I think it should pass in full. All right, now, February 28th, I think it was February 28th, February 28th, 2023, Representative James Clyburn and Seth Moulton were on Morning Joe on MSNBC, okay? And I want to go to that clip here. How's everybody doing? We'll go to that clip here in just a minute. All right, how's everybody doing? Ali Garrett said, he said every time the Democrats propose a bill to help Black Americans or other minorities, women and the poor, the Republicans just block it, and anybody who is not a heterosexual white man gets no help in America. That's why Republicans have to be taken out of power, and you got to get to so Democrats have to take back control of the House of Representatives. And I'm neither Democrat nor Republican, but I sure as hell ain't stupid. I can see who keeps blocking and voting against policies that are beneficial for us, and I can see who keeps voting for policies that are beneficial for us and who keeps writing those policies. And that's why Democrats have to take back control of the House of Representatives. But also you need to get like 54, 55 Democratic senators so that you can do a carve out to the filibuster in the Senate, or change the filibuster and go back to a talking standing filibuster. Okay, because as it stands now, you have to get 60 votes to get any of these bills passed, unless it's dealing with federal judges. Okay, you have to get 60 votes, and federal judges or U.S. Supreme Court judges, unless it's dealing with judges. And trying to get 60 votes is a tall order in the Senate. All right, now I want to go to this clip here. This is from Morning Joe, and Representative James Clyburn and Seth Moulton are talking about the bill that they are reintroducing. Also, if you like this type of information, you can support the African History Network. $ the AHN Show through Cash App, $ the AHN Show through Cash App, also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN Show. And we also have the information on the homepage of our website. And this is our official Cash App account, $ the AHN Show. There's some fake African History Network Cash App accounts out there that I'm still trying to get shut down. This is ours. Our tag is $ the AHN Show, SHOW. When you go to it, it'll say Michael. Make sure my picture there also. These other ones are fake African History Network Cash App accounts. I've identified 5 of them, and they're using versions of our Cash App tag, and they've been stealing money from us. Okay, so it's creating a huge problem. So we have the information right here on the homepage of our website also, and you can just click on our link. And it has our QR code as well for Cash App here. And we have the link for PayPal also. All right. I want to go to this clip here from Morning Joe, where they explain this bill and why it's so important.
More than 2 years ago, we spoke with Democratic Congressman Seth Moulton of Massachusetts and Jim Clyburn of South Carolina about a push to restore the GI Bill originally signed into law back in 1944. Right now, they're reigniting those efforts in the new Congress. And join us to discuss that push. It's great having you guys here. Jim, how's it go? Always great to see you, Jim. How's it going?
Going very well. Thank you very much for having us this morning. It's always good to hang out with this Joe as well.
Yeah, exactly. And how are the efforts for the new GI Bill going?
Well, we just reintroduced it for the second time. Seth and I did it last Congress, and we did not get far with it. But, you know, I'm from the area of the country that says, if at first you don't succeed, try and try again. So we're going to make another effort in this Congress, and hopefully we'll get some traction on this bill. It's much needed and worthwhile.
Robinson, explain to us exactly what your bill would do and who it would help.
Well, if you look at what happened after World War II, many soldiers came back having won a tremendous victory, and a lot of those soldiers were African Americans who fought to win that war on the promise of America. But when they got home, the GI Bill was put in place to basically to educate them, to give housing to them so they could get reestablished back in their communities. But the black soldiers did not get the benefit of it. In New York and New Jersey's suburbs, only 1% of those loans went to African Americans. When you get to just the GI Bill alone in 1947, out of 3,000, only 2, not 2%, 2 went to African Americans. And so you can't pass on the wealth if you don't get the benefits of it. So those soldiers who got the GI Bill, purchased homes, passed on that equity to their children and grandchildren, black soldiers did not get it. And so what we're doing with this legislation is asking for us to visit this issue, take a hard look at what soldiers did not get it, and look at what we can do for their surviving spouses, children, and other relatives.
Congressman Moulton, I grew up on a street that is right at the edge of your congressional district. And on my street, when I was growing up, nearly half of the families were recipients and beneficiaries of the GI Bill from World War II. So my question to you, and with Congressman Clyburn there as well, my question to both of you, but start with you, Congressman Moulton, what can we do to publicize, to make known more widely the fact of those benefits of the GI Bill that can be accrued now to people who have been fighting our wars for nearly 20 straight years?
Well, it's a great question, because as a Marine veteran myself, someone who would not be here in Congress without the benefits of the GI Bill, and I can say that confidently, I had no idea that this had occurred, that so many black veterans who fought right alongside white soldiers and Marines in World War II were simply denied these benefits that they had earned when they came home. And the two ways to gain wealth in America that everybody knows are getting an education, going to college, and having a home. Those were denied to so many black veterans. But it was actually a Marine in my office who heard about this, brought it to my attention, and that's why I wrote this bill. And when I looked for the first co-sponsor, I looked to the moral leader of our caucus and our Congress, Jim Clyburn, so we can get it across the finish line. We're not doing this because it's politically easy. We're doing it because it's the right thing to do.
Then, Congressman Clyburn, what do you have to say about making this more widely known?
Well, I think that we have to keep these kinds of efforts going, and we have to put a face on it. Sergeant Maddox, who did not get educational benefits up at Harvard because they did not want to set a precedent. Sergeant Woodard down in South Carolina, who had his eyes punched out by a deputy sheriff and was blinded for the rest of his life in his uniform, coming home from World War II. We've named this legislation after these two sergeants, and we think that their children and their descendants, many of whom I've met and have interacted with, we can get this across the finish line if more people knew that this had occurred. Just think about the Tuskegee Airmen and the glory that we've given to them. Yet, they have to be
so
heroes
check that out.
in World War
That's,
II.
on
Many of them were denied
MSNBC
the GI
YouTube
Bill.
channel.